All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm here, like I said, today with Dr. Vincent Diego. We call him Vince. So, Vince, thanks for joining the show. I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
And
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, just real quick, the way I like to, introduce my guests is, have them talk a little bit about their educational background and experiences. And so, we talk about where you grew up, how you ended up at UTRGV. You kind of give a brief synopsis, 8 minutes or so, however long you want to take. But
Okay.
yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Alrighty. So I am from the island of Guam, and actually it becomes relevant to my education. So just in case you don't know where it is, it's in the far western northwest Pacific. It's about 15 degrees north of the equator, and
Wow.
probably the closest continental island type landmass close to it would be the northern Philippines, and then southern Japan after that. So we're very far out western Pacific. It's farther. I like to tell people that we're farther from Hawaii than Hawaii is from California.
Wow.
Think of it that way.
Wow.
The Pacific Ocean is
Mhm.
huge.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I born and raised in Guam. It's a U.S. territory, and so everything's it follows the U.S. Education system.
Oh, wow.
And I got my bachelor's in biology at the University of Guam, and I was working on my master's in biology at the University of Guam. And so let me backtrack. And so my whole story actually for even coming down here starts in 1950.
Wow.
Way before I was a gleam in my pappy's eye. My friend likes to say that. Anyways, 1950, 5 years after the war. So there are a ton of there's a huge military presence, anyways, in on Guam, and there's a ton of military doctors there, and they were observing these huge, these high rates of highly elevated rates of what would come to be a very famous neurological syndrome, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as motor neuron disease in the UK, or Lou Gehrig's disease, more informally, or also muscle wasting.
So that's ALS?
Yes,
Yeah?
ALS.
Yeah.
And Parkinson's and dementia. So these were occurring at high rates as a neurological syndrome. In fact, it is an official categorized syndrome in the neurological community, and it's well known. It's Guamanian amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Parkinsonism, dementia complex. I'll just say ALS-PDC from now on. And so at one point it was like 100 times the U.S. rate, and
Wow.
As you can imagine, it attracted international attention. Like, people were coming to Guam, and really, to put it kind of cynically, in search of a Nobel Prize, because as my advisor, and I'll get to him soon, my dissertation advisor would describe it, it was thought of in the neurological community as potentially providing like a Rosetta Stone. You know how like the Rosetta Stone it was a stone that had 3 different languages, and so by that they were able to decipher hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
Well, so the neurological community was thinking of it as a Rosetta Stone for neurological disorders. If they could figure this out, like what's causing this,
Yeah.
then perhaps they could figure out every other, or not every other, but like a bunch of other neurological.
Yeah, just get a better understanding
Yes.
of the mechanisms at
Right,
work and
the
what
biology.
they're exposed to that's making them.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so this kind of transpired for about 30 years, from the 50s to the 80s, and
Wow.
still no resolution, no solution to the mystery. And so this comes to my time now as a graduate student in 1995. Actually, 96 was my second year in grad school, and at the University of Guam. And it just so happened that there was this international symposium being held at the University of Guam on Guamanian ALS PDC. And so all of the big players came and, gave their talk and talked about, what they thought was going on, what were the causes. No one, to this day, no one knows. And what happened. And I became completely enamored with this mystery, and I wanted to pursue it.
So that's what spurred your biology track. And...
Well, so I was already in biology, and I was
okay.
really interested in biology, but this
so
I was kind of actually flopping around in grad school because the program was catering to its strength, which was in marine biology, but I wasn't really interested in marine biology. I was more interested in humans. And so when this symposium came up, I was like, that's what I want to study.
Cool.
Right? And
so that happened when you were in graduate school?
Yes,
yeah.
At the University of Guam, working on my master's in biology. And so I applied to work with on my dissertation with one of the world-renowned researchers. He had been studying this Guamanian LSPDC for over 30 years, and with actually with a Nobel Prize winner at the National Institute. It's now defunct, at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Strokes. Stroke. He was studying with D. Carlton Gajdusek. He won the Nobel Prize for discovering Kuru, which would turn out to be the first prion disease.
Wow.
And
wow.
Anyway, so
just real quick for our non-science listeners,
yes.
Prion diseases are like wasting, or wasting
right.
disease, also known as mad cow.
Right, and it was completely revolutionary because every other viral or bacterial disease was kind of DNA based. This was the first protein based.
Wow.
Transmissible proteins.
Crazy.
Right, and so yeah, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I applied to study with him, and I guess he felt sorry for the folks back home, and so he said, yeah, I'll take this this student. And so I came up to it was in at Binghamton University, State University of New York. It's considered upstate New York. And so there I am, this tropical islander, going up to the frigid north to study Guamanian ALS PDC. But when I first came, I told him I want to study the genetics of it, the genetics of this disease. And he says, Vince, you're out of luck. I mean, I'm an expert on this. I'm trained as a neuroscientist, but I'm not, I suck at genetics. And he said, however, I have really good friends in San Antonio, Texas, who are among the world leaders in the genetics of complex disease and statistical genetics. And their names are Drs. Jean McClure and Sarah Williams Blangero and John Blangero. And so that was in 1999, and it just so happened it was these are rare actually, but it was a sequential master's and PhD program. You had to do the master's and then the PhD. And so I told him I want to do because I wanted to be rounded as a biologist. I said I would do my master's in infectious disease biology, and I was interested in mathematical applications, so I studied the population biology and mathematical biology of infectious disease for my master's. Cool. And then in 2001, I told him, I said, but for my PhD, from the beginning, I told him I want to study the genetics of Guamanian ALS PDC, right? And so so at the beginning, he told me, I'll talk to my friends in San Antonio about training you. And in fact, there was a meeting there at 1999 in San Antonio.
Wow. And
he did, and it was hosted by what was then the Southwest Foundation for Biomedical Research, which was where John Blangero and Sarah Williams Blangero, again, their names will pop up again, were, and they hosted the meeting. And so he talked with them at the meeting, and he says, hey, I have this student who wants to train with you guys. And they said, yeah, sure, send him when he's ready.
Wow, that's awesome.
2 years later, I did the master's. I'm ready to start. And like an idiot, or I guess a busy grad student, I forgot to apply for departmental funding.
Oh, no.
My advisor comes to me in my office, and he chews me out. So it's like, I guess you're gonna have to flip burgers, you know,
Yeah,
for your
pay your way
dissertation.
through, yeah.
And then, but I think he was holding out because like the very next week he tells me, he's like, hey, you're in luck. You know those folks I talked to in San Antonio. In fact, Gene was the senior scientist in the Department of Genetics at this Southwest Foundation for Biomedical Research. It would come to be called the Texas Biomedical Research Institute. Well, anyways, he said, Gene is losing her postdoc. She just got a professor position at University of North Carolina. However, they want to take you as soon as possible so this person can train you in you know what she does, and so that way there's no lag you know in their research progress.
Yeah, of course.
And so I was like, hell yeah! Like, you know, it sounds like a bat out of hell. Like,
That's awesome.
And anyways, I was a poor grad student in upstate New York, the frigid north, and I hated it as a Pacific Islander. And I can do it, but I hated it. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going down to Texas, baby. And so I went to San Antonio.
Okay, well, just real quick, we're gonna take a quick music break,
Yeah.
and so I feel like this is a good place to stop, and we
Yes.
can continue the story of you moving to San Antonio and
Yeah.
your experience there. So stay tuned, everyone, and we'll be right back. Thanks a lot. All right, and we're back with Dr. Diego. So, you know, like I was talking during the radio or the music break, seems like, you know, almost like with Dr. Bala, like the stars aligned in terms of, you know, that opportunity to go in terms of the funding opening up essentially, right? Because that postdoc moved on in their career and it opened up the opportunity for you to, you know, get that funding.
And me forgetting, and the meeting happening at a time when I told my professor that I wanted to train in genetics. And so he had that opportunity on site to request for that in advance, right? So that would have been in their mind, right? And so I was telling Ricardo, I'm a Christian, so I prefer to think of it as divine providence, that God had his hand on it the whole time. And so we believe in that there's no accidents, that he designed it, and in fact he did. And so to continue with my story, there I was. I found myself in San Antonio, now gainfully employed as, at the master's level, mind you. So this is, and for those of you who don't know a thing about graduate school, technically you are actually below the poverty line. So this was a drastic change in my economic circumstances, right? From being a poor grad student to being employed at the master's level, which was it was amazing. And anyways, so I came down to San Antonio to train in statistical genetics, it turns out. And well, complex genetics and statistical genetics, they kind of overlap a lot. And so I first came to work with Dr. Gene McClure, who was the elder statesman of the Department of Genetics in what would be the Texas Biomedical Research Institute. Anyway, she was kind of in the twilight of her career, so she was kind of she was phasing out, and at the same time phasing in Doctors Sarah Williams Blangiero. Again, they'll become more and more relevant, and Dr. John Blangiero into the leadership roles. They were already in the leadership roles, but like she was gonna fully hand off the reins in terms of like the grants.
Oh,
right?
wow, yeah.
Which for those of you who don't know, in the scientific community, that we run on grants, and so she was gonna hand off, so to speak, these grants to them, and they were getting their own grants at any rate. But so for my training, Dr. John Blangiero, who is an absolutely brilliant, he's genius level statistical geneticist. He was the one who trained me in all that I know in statistical genetics. And I just, I have so many stories with him. And it's like he'll come to me with like something that he's developed, some new statistical genetic approach that he's developed, and he'll go over it with me, and it'll take me like weeks to a month of like intensely studying it, and then I'll come back to him later and say, okay, I finally understand it. Now we can talk more about it.
Yeah,
But,
some of my favorite moments being a student in the department is hearing him and Dr. Kumar talk about
Yes,
their
yes.
ideas, and I'm just like,
Right,
oh my
yeah,
goodness.
it's just mind blowing, right? And conversely, like if I often like to take my hand at trying to develop a statistical genetics model, and I'll work on it for like months, and then I'll come to him with it, and he'll like immediately understand it, and then poke holes, and then also show it's like also you can make it better this way and that way.
That's
like,
cool though.
yeah, I mean it's cool, but it just shows you
The
that
levels,
huge,
yeah.
that vast difference between he's really, and I'm not saying this to puff him up. It's true. He's a genius level statistical genetics. I'm more like pedestrian level, but I love doing what I do. And
Yeah, of course.
anyways, so that department was was, because it's now defunct, and you'll find out why shortly, was famous all over the world for studying all kinds of complex disease and developing statistical genetic approaches to study these diseases.
Wow.
Heart disease, obesity, diabetes, what have you, right? And so that would go on. So I got my PhD with training under Dr. John Banjero in 2005, and then I stayed on as a postdoc, stayed on as a scientist, so up to 2014, and then that marked a watershed year in my career because the entire department was recruited, but about 24 of us decided to just up and move from San Antonio, Texas, to UT-RGV to
Wow.
start a.
And what year was that? 2014?
Well, it was 2014,
Oh,
but
okay.
I came on officially. It's funny. Well, actually, I did come in officially 2014, December 31st,
Wow.
and it was for tax purposes. I would get 1 day of tax return money for
That's
that
funny.
year. It's funny. Well, Sarah and John had come the year before, so I just
Okay.
put it at 2014.
Okay.
And anyways.
So they helped establish the
Yes.
South Texas.
So we came down first as to establish an institute of research, right? The South Texas Diabetes and Obesity Institute, and then about I forget the timeline, maybe 3-4 years later, we were going to start, or we started a Department of Human Genetics, right? And so the two became one, and I think as far as like organizational structure, the Department of Human Genetics houses so to speak, the South Texas Diabetes and Obesity Institute. So all of the research scientists who were in the institute automatically became part of the professors in the Department of Human Genetics.
So I guess there was, was that something that was anticipated? Because it's kind of, I almost feel
yes,
like you
yes,
could be-
that was actually part of the deal.
Okay.
That you'll come down, start
The institute?
The institute as part of the medical school, by the way, which
okay.
was a brand new medical school in the valley, right? And then the guarantee since the beginning was that when you get your once you get up and running and you get acclimated, so to speak, we'll help you start a full-blown Department of Human Genetics.
Cool.
And we had all the money, the grant, like as I said earlier, you need grant money. That's how science runs. And we had the grant money, we had the studies, we had the pedigree,
Expertise,
everything, right? We were a full-blown Department of Human Genetics already, right? It's just it wasn't official, but then really I just look at it as like a rubber stamp. Then we became an official Department of Human Genetics, maybe like 5 years later.
Cool.
That's funny. That whole process was extremely bureaucratic, and it involved like system level.
Yeah, of course. Texas approvals
yes.
and all kinds of,
Yeah, all the way up to the legislature. So it's crazy, right? Just to become a full-blown department. And then it was also bureaucratic to start the PhD program. And as you know, you guys were Ricardo was part of the first year.
Yeah, fall 2022.
Yeah, so that was 3 years ago. And so we also became, professors in the PhD program in human genetics. By the way, I teach biostatistics, and Ricardo did well. Anyways,
I did my best, I should say.
Right. So I was trained in statistical genetics, and I applied statistical genetics to study things like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and because fatty liver disease is extremely high in the valley.
Mhm.
I think up to
Non-alcoholic fatty liver?
Yeah,
Like
yes,
apples?
yeah,
Yeah, I think
it's-
it's over
it's-
50%
yeah,
or around.
I want to
50%.
say 2/3.
Yeah,
right?
pushing 60
It's
plus
crazy.
percent,
Yeah, it's like extremely prevalent. Chronic kidney disease is prevalent. Of course, as we know, diabetes and obesity,
Mhm.
and so we're trying to understand basically the biology. What are the determinants of these complex diseases?
Mhm.
And back to my dissertation. My dissertation was actually on gene bioenvironment interaction modeling, right, from a statistical genetics perspective. And so that's all I've been doing, applying statistical genetic approaches on gene bioenvironment interaction, trying to understand how our genes and our environments interact
Mhm.
to produce these these diseases, right?
Yeah, so I've talked about it quite a bit in the show because that is something
Oh,
that
okay,
interests, that interests me as well. Doing the work
Right.
that I'm doing with Dr. Vandenberg.
Right.
So yeah, the gene-environment interaction for our new listeners is just basically a simple way to think about it is how the environment makes you sick, right? So
Right.
the easy example everyone thinks about is like a radioactive site like Chernobyl or Fukushima, where it's got this high concentration of terrible radioactive waste, melt down nuclear facilities. And of course, plants and animals and people get sick the closer they are to those areas. So it's basically things in the environment that make people sick.
Right.
And like the way Dr. Diego was talking about at the beginning of the show, the same way in terms of in Guam with the neurological disorders. So, that's just another example of like, hey, there's something in the environment that's causing this, and we need to try to figure it out.
In fact, that was instrumental in getting me to think about gene bioenvironment interaction, because whereas I was focused on genetics, my advisor was actually pushing the environmental etiology of Guamanian ALS-PDC,
Mhm.
and we would often hash it out. And yeah, so if you go to grad school, don't be quiet little lamb. You need to challenge even your advisor. And anyways, yeah, so go to grad school.
All right, well, we're just gonna take another
Yeah,
quick
go
music break, so stay tuned. All right, thanks for staying tuned, everyone, and we're back. So,
So
Dr. Diego, you want to talk about?
yes, so I'd like to continue. So my work is on the using gene bioenvironment modeling of complex disease to try to get at the underlying determinants of these diseases. And for our latest publications, we've done work on the effect of. So when we say environment, we're talking about specific environments. So like for NAFO disease, or what's we call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFO for short. So we've shown that something like the social determinants of health, these things can be measured,
Mhm.
like transportation opportunities, housing,
Education levels.
right? Education levels. I'll get to that as well. So we can measure with surveys and survey instruments to measure someone's the extent of their levels of social determinants of health, right? And we found that has an important influence on the genetics underlying fatty liver disease.
Wow.
But then, and you mentioned education, and we have education data for what's one of our biggest study. It's called the Mexican American Family Study, and so I computed a bunch of there are some mathematical ways to compute CVD, cardiovascular disease risk, right? So I followed like 3 methods, and I computed CVD risk for the individuals in our study based on like their physiological data. And then we also had physiological measurements of CVD risk, which was called carotid artery intermediate thicknesses. And so there's for the near wall and far wall. And so I wanted to study how the genes underlying these risk variables, right, the mathematical risk variables and the physiological risk variables for CVD risk, how they were influenced or modulated. I like to think of gene by environment interaction as how the environment modulates our genetics. Right?
Mhm.
So I wanted to, I asked the question, how does their education levels modulate the genetics influencing these risk variables, right? And we found that their education levels actually have a profound impact on profound and detectable, significant, statistically significant impact on the genetic effects underlying these risk variables. And they were consistent across the mathematical risk variables and the physiological risk variables.
Mhm.
And that was published like last year. And I'm super excited about that approach and that finding, because it is very relevant to another one of the diseases that we study. The Department of Human Genetics and the South Texas Diabetes and Obesity Institute collaborates with many other institutes, and in particular, the neuroscience, what's called ION, the Institute of Neuroscience, and there's a group there headed by Dr. Gladys Maestra, and she also has kind of her own institute
Mhm.
that was actually founded before the ION, before the Institute of Neuroscience. It's called the Alzheimer's Disease Resource Center for Minority Aging Research. So I'm just giving a plug for you, Dr. Gladys.
Yeah, I've invited her to the show, so hopefully this
Right.
semester.
Yeah, hopefully she will
Yeah,
come.
hopefully she can come
And
on.
yeah, she's a wonderful, wonderful scientist, wonderful lady. She MD, PhD, brilliant lady. And anyways, so she's focusing on Alzheimer's disease in Latino populations, and in particular, Mexican Americans in the Valley.
Mhm.
And one of the, I want to say number one, I might be wrong, but not far off, but perhaps the number one risk factor, protective against Alzheimer's disease, is education.
Wow.
Yes. And so knowing this and
Wow.
and having this success in establishing that education has a profound impact on the genetics underlying CVD risk,
Mhm.
I am now investigating or dead set on investigating the effect of education on the genetics underlying Alzheimer's disease risk. And one of the powerful things that our department can do is, so I'm just studying it at the statistical genetics level, right? But our bright up and coming scientists like Ricardo, he'll soon, he will, I declare it, in the name of the Lord, he will get his PhD in human genetics. But a lot of our bright students are applying state-of-the-art molecular and cellular techniques to get at the molecular underpinnings.
Mhm.
Right? So I can study, I can show at a rough coarse grain level that genetic effects are being influenced by the environment, but we are leaving it to scientists like Ricardo to lead the way in actually pinpointing the actual molecular determinants, right, at the level of the actual genes and proteins that are affecting these changes.
Yeah, like biomarker discovery type,
Right.
or some
Yes,
kind of
exactly.
target to
Exactly.
develop their therapeutics for. That's why I love the wet lab so much.
Right.
Dry lab is cool, but me personally, I like to be in.
And I told Dr. Manu, we were talking about another colleague of ours, Dr. Aaron Manusov. I've been doing this work on G by E, by the way, with Dr. Aaron Manusov, who's a physician scientist. And we have this common interest on the social determinants of health and things like the effect of education on our biology. And so I was telling Dr. Manisov when we were talking about this, we often talk, we have a huddle of like all our team of research scientists and graduate students. And I was telling him, I was actually telling the group that as far as like gene by environment interaction is concerned, the holy grail, right? The thing that we want to get to, right, is to discover the molecular underpinnings of the effect of the environment on our genetics, right? It's like the way I look at it, like I said earlier, the environment modulates our genetics. And how does it do that in particular? The environment kind of acts on our genes as like triggers, right? So our genes are like switches, right? They can be turned on and off, right? Or they can be increased in expression, they can be decreased. We call that upregulation and downregulation, right? And a lot of this, dynamic nature of our set of genes, our gene expression, it's influenced directly by the environment. The environment is what is modulating, right, the expression levels of our genes.
And another thing I like to mention when we talk about G by E is it's not just a physical outdoor environment, because when people hear environment, they automatically
you think of the outdoors.
Yeah,
right?
so it's also your personal stressors, like if you stress a lot, how much you exercise, and it's basically anything you can think of as the environment.
Oh, and so by the way, every time I get to get the chance to make this plug, we are pushing for what I am describing as at least to our group, and even in our writings, in our publications, as a paradigm shift, right? So in the 70s, he has since been knighted, Sir Michael Marmot discovered that these social determinants of health have a profound influence on mortality and morbidity. There's this strong inverse relationship, and it has been shown, demonstrated throughout the globe for many different populations, right? That if your I'll describe it this way: if your socioeconomic status level is low, you're at a higher risk for mortality and morbidity for all kinds of diseases, cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, right? Right. So for the longest time, they've as far as like explaining this relationship, this inverse relationship between socioeconomic status and mortality and morbidity due to disease, right? They would adopt this top-down causation where they would say it's phenomena and factors operating at the sociological level and at the level of behavior that kind of impinge downward, so to speak, onto our molecular biology, and that's how we get this relationship between social determinants of health and disease. But we're arguing for the complete reverse, right? And that's why I'm calling it a paradigm shift, where we're arguing for a bottom-up approach, where in terms of causation, where these environments are acting as like triggers that are effectuating these changes or switches on the genetic switches, right? And they're acting at the bottom level, at the very bottom level of, when I say bottom, I'm thinking, and top, I'm thinking of this is traditionally taught in biology, right? There's this biological hierarchy, right? You start at the molecular level, they effect changes to the cellular level, and then they have changes. Those changes have ramifications for the tissue level, and then you have the organ level, and then systems, and then organisms, and then the populations and communities, right? We're saying all of this starts at the molecular level, at the bottom of the biological hierarchy, and that's what's producing this strong inverse relationship between social determinants of health and morbidity and mortality, right? That these environments are influencing in a profound way and detectable and measurable way, affecting changes in our gene expression.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about.
Yes.
And with that thought, we're going to take our last music break for the show, and we'll be right back. So stay tuned, everyone. Thanks.